It's the first team selector of 24-25. Chelsea kicking off their season tomorrow afternoon at Stamford Bridge in the Premier League against Manchester City. It doesn't get much tougher. A start for Enzo Maresca, not even factoring in the mess that has been Chelsea's summer. But tomorrow, what a chance for Maresca and for Chelsea to silence those doubts, to silence those critics, to silence the feeling of concern moving into this season by getting a positive result and lighting up Stamford Bridge and maybe sending shocks kind of around the world. But given everything that's been said about Chelsea and everything we've been talking about and reacting to over the course of this summer. So we're going to get into Man City, what Maresca said in the press conference, and then I'll give you my predicted lineup. Two quick kind of plugs before we do get going. I'm not the biggest fantasy league player, I have to say, Fantasy Premier League, but this year I have set up a league, the No Profit or Sustainability League, and the great thing about this league, obviously free to enter. If you're a big FPL player, join my league. Others have already, but we'll be assessing it during the season because the guys at Alloy Collectors, who I've done stuff with before, are offering vouchers or gifts at the end of each month for the player who's top of the league. So that's cool. You can get some rewards and play FPL if you're a big player as well. I think there's a high chance I'm not top of this league, but we'll see how we go. The other thing is podcast related. So you may have known, you may have not seen it, but definitely go and check out the podcast. I am now the co-host of the Chelsea Echo, me and Louis Benavente. I did the first podcast, obviously previewing the season and the City game. So we'll be with Louis throughout the season, reacting to whatever goes on at Stamford Bridge. So go and check out the pod. It was fun to do, and I'm sure is going to be quite funny to do over the course of the season. We're obviously talking seriously about Chelsea, but there are some fun things mixed in there as well. So let's jump into it. Enzo Maresca's first game. In terms of the press conference, the key information was really only Reece James is injured. Of course, no need for a massive undergoing our rehabilitation phase, but I guess whether you could argue Chelsea as a club are undergoing the rehabilitation phase. Let's hope we don't have a massive list to read out every week like we did last year, but we knew Reece was injured. Maresca was also asked about the Conor Gallagher situation. He was asked about potential new signings. He was also asked about Ben Chilwell, where he gave a really frank answer. I mean, more than I expected, in terms of effectively saying he should go and find minutes because clearly he isn't favoured here. So that's something we'll see develop before transfer deadline day if Ben Chilwell does eventually move on. But this is obviously a huge game for Maresca, and the narrative naturally is linking him with Pep Guardiola, a coach he worked with, a coach whose style of football he in some ways wants to reflect, some ways believes in very wholeheartedly. Of course, he rejected just being Diet Pep or being a clone earlier in the summer, but we'll see how it works at Chelsea because, for him, he really needs to prove he's more than just a clone of Pep Guardiola in the sense that he's just playing a style of football because it's the hip thing to do. Is it actually making Chelsea a fundamentally better team? Is it choosing the right players? Are we sacrificing some players at the altar of this style of football? These are going to be big theory and I think very tangible things we're going to assess over the course of the season. Now, I'm not expecting Maresca to have everything sorted out by the end of August. But I don't think I'm being unfair when I suggest that results need to come for Chelsea this season in a lot of ways and for a lot of reasons. Chelsea cannot afford to wait till about Christmas to click into gear. This cannot be deemed another transition season. This is a season where just financially, reality-wise, Chelsea need to start getting results and they need to qualify for the Champions League. Now, that isn't going to be determined at all on the first weekend of the season, but in terms of setting the mood, I think Chelsea need to show, and Maresca needs to show the Chelsea fans at Stamford Bridge pretty quickly, there is something to believe in, there is something to buy into this season, and I think that there is no better place to have a good performance than of course against the champions, but that isn't easy. I think moving on to Man City, yes, they are a daunting task. I mean, the way Chelsea were quite easily beaten by them in pre-season, kind of showcased the difference between the teams, even though Chelsea, what you would deem kind of as closer to a first 11, it was more so Chelsea than Man City. And we'll get to how Chelsea, I think, at times are their own worst enemies, and that is kind of one of my big concerns heading into this game. But in terms of Man City, there is the kind of slight glimmer of hope that at this time of the season, sometimes they can be a little bit fragile and they can give you a bit of a glimpse and a bit of a look in. Because as we know with Man City, they really click into gear around November, December, heading into the new year, when that's when they really take off. And we see a few dodgy results from them early in the season. And maybe the sense of chaos, the sense of unpredictability about Chelsea may help that. But of course, they still have individually wonderful players. The biggest positive, I guess, from a Chelsea point of view is no Rodri. Rodri will not be playing this game. He is such an integral player for them. And if you look at the stats from last season and also across recent years, when they don't have Rodri, they are not as impactful a team. He is such a leading figure for them in central midfield. He can also score big goals against Chelsea, as we know. So I feel that obviously Rodri missing from that central midfield, and you're going to play Mateo Kovacic there, or you're going to play someone else there. There isn't an obvious solution when they don't have Rodri. So that is something that maybe Maresca will be looking to target and exploit tomorrow. No Oscar Bob, who scored against Chelsea in pre-season and has been one of their best performers in pre-season, suffering a big injury. He got to start in the Community Shield, so a big setback for him. But I do think looking at their last lineup, it's going to be quite similar. I think the big returning players, Bernardo Silva, Phil Foden, Matthias Nunes, Nathan Ake, Kevin De Bruyne, I think they will all play a part in the starting 11. You could kind of see that Pep in some ways over pre-season has wanted to kind of bring through a younger generation. I'm not sure if he's going to do that against Chelsea in the opening game, but something to watch out for. And again, could that be something Chelsea look to exploit and kind of, if you're going on a player like O'Reilly, who started the Community Shield, if he gets a start unexpectedly in the Premier League, will he be up to it? Even though City players like Chelsea players are technically well developed, it's of course a big leap up when you're playing in the Premier League on a showcase Super Sunday afternoon. So listen, I think that City are obviously the favourites. I think if City play anywhere close to their best, I think it's going to be very difficult for Chelsea to stop them. And I think from a tactical point of view, one of the things I loved about Chelsea last year, especially against Man City, was Chelsea's ability to kind of play their own game and try and go at City. I think my big concern is Chelsea will be so focused on playing and trying to learn this new style of football under Maresca that it isn't going to be about counteracting that much what City do. And because City will be so well accustomed, because Guardiola will be so well accustomed to that style of play, and because of the fragilities we've seen throughout pre-season, maybe Chelsea won't be able to hurt City in the same way. Hopefully that won't be the case, but that will be my big concern heading into this game, because really the concerns from Chelsea start literally at goalkeeper. They start from us playing up from the back. And as we saw in pre-season, when a team decided to press Chelsea very high, as City and Celtic did, Chelsea were calamitous. Robert Sanchez making really bad decisions with the ball. Centre-backs making really bad decisions with the ball. Chelsea losing the ball in really poor areas, and the high line being exploited on a number of occasions. These things will be targeted by not only Guardiola, but I suspect the likes of Mikel Arteta. I suspect the likes of Slot, obviously, at Liverpool. Teams who are able to press you high will look to exploit this on a number of occasions. And it's looking at this and going, is it actually benefiting Chelsea, and how much pain are you willing to go through until you realise that an adaptation needs to come? I look back a few years ago at Erik ten Hag at Manchester United, where he started the season terribly. Man United were trying to play out from the back. It couldn't happen. I'm not quite, I don't think our players are maybe as bad as the United squad to kind of adapt to this style of football. I don't think that at all. But it was costing United badly, and Ten Hag was already under serious pressure, and it was not a good look for him. He adapted, and Man United had a decent season. Will Maresca do that? We'll have to see. I think it's unlikely, but again, that conversation I think will very quickly happen if Chelsea don't start off strongly. If they start off strongly, it will be a very different conversation. So let's get into my starting 11. I feel like last weekend against Inter Milan gave us a very good look at certain individuals that probably will be starting this game. I think firstly, it's Robert Sanchez in goal. Now, my thoughts on Robert Sanchez. I don't think they are a minority position. I think most people, if they watched Robert Sanchez for any period of time last season, will have deep concerns about him walking into this season as Chelsea's first choice keeper. Why are we isolating and ostracising Georgia Petrovic, who clearly had a better season last year? And even this kind of ingrained belief from people that Sanchez is technically better with the ball at his feet, we saw over the course of last season that just wasn't the case. So again, this is now going to be highlighted on a massive way. It's very easy during pre-season to look at when he makes mistakes and go, it's just pre-season. If it starts happening, in big important games where the spotlight's on, it's going to be a very different conversation, and whether Jorgensen will come into the starting 11. Malo Gusto, I really like the fact that in the second half against Inter Milan, Gusto was able to play more as a wing back, more kind of as a natural fullback. Let's see if that happens again. But Gusto had a really strong season last year. Let's hope he continues that in that fashion. The back two is very difficult to predict because I don't think any back two has overly convinced me. The only reason I'm going for these two is because reporting has basically suggested they are the first choice, and that is Wesley Fofana returning from his long-term injury and Levi Colwill. I think if you were to press me on what I would deem a first choice back two for the majority of the season, this would be the pair. It's just based on what I've seen from them so far. They haven't overly convinced. Fofana has looked a little bit slow, a little bit sluggish to react. The high line still seems to be working out, and the man-to-man marking across the pitch looks like it can be exploited in a big way. So technically, I think these two players can be big players and big defenders for Chelsea. It's just, again, it's that kind of awkwardness of a new system. Cucurella, natural fit here. I think he'll start this game. Obviously, has had a brilliant summer. Let's hope he can continue the form he showed at the back end of last season. And the midfield is, I think, a troublesome area for Chelsea. It really is. I think it's more so who you start in this area obviously maybe limits who you play further up the pitch. And I think the problem that Maresca had in the pre-season game was he decided to start 4 midfielders. I don't think he should be doing that in this game. You need width on both sides. You can't have a situation where if Chelsea are trying to attack, it becomes very lopsided and we're looking at Mykhailo Mudryk on the right wing. I don't think that's going to happen tomorrow, but just as an example, it's all right trying to clutter the midfield to try and overwhelm teams in midfield, but you still need to have the width out wide to actually do what Maresca wants to do with his style of play. It's all about getting those wide players, natural wide players, 1v1 against their opposing fullbacks and creating those overloads. So for me, you've got to have natural, for me, wide attack threats on both sides for me. So Lavia, I think, has had a positive pre-season. Moises Caicedo had a brilliant end to last season. Hasn't been amazing in pre-season, but I think deserves to start this game. I don't think, for me, I'm not glowing about this player, and I think for him it's a big season for a number of reasons. Actually, off the pitch issues, we'll see how that develops, but he will likely be wearing the captain's armband tomorrow, which potentially opens up a can of worms on its own. But, Enzo Fernandez, he really needs to prove that he can be a huge player for Chelsea. I think he's going to get a lot of minutes and a lot of favourability from another Enzo Maresca. And he needs to prove that he, off the ball, isn't so troublesome for Chelsea, that, on the ball, he's so dominating that you can't not have him in the team. I think we've seen glimpses of that in pre-season. He set up a goal for Noni Madueke. He set up a nice pass for Nkunku against Man City. So the idea that this guy technically, isn't to a high level, I think obviously is foolish. But I think in terms of his actual impact on the pitch, it's seeing that on a consistent basis. And against a team like Man City, it's a great opportunity to showcase his ability, as he did 12 months ago against Liverpool, where he had a really good performance. Then we get into the front three. For me, it's pretty simple, and these 3 players should be starting this game. Cole Palmer on the right, but I don't want to see him exactly wide right. It's where I think him and Gusto, as they did in the second half against Inter Milan, can kind of swap a little bit, because you need Palmer free enough, and this is it's going to be one of the big conversation points over the course of the season, is Cole Palmer, because he was Chelsea's star last season. Cole Palmer, technically off the right, I think he will float in and should be floating in to get involved in play. Nicholas Jackson hasn't played a lot of pre-season, and maybe a lot of people based on form will go with Mark Guiu, but I think Jackson, for me, is the more Premier League proven player, is the player that I just feel, again, more seniority, I think deserves to start the season as Chelsea centre forward. We're not sure how that attack is going to look after transfer deadline day, but I still like Jackson, I really do. And I just think he did so much last year in terms of his ability in front of goal, taking opportunities, but also his all-round game in terms of physically adapting to the Premier League as well. So we'll see how he does this year. And Christopher Nkunku, who had a really good pre-season, great, he's come into the season proper. I think it's big to see him on the pitch. I think he could be a huge player, transformative player for Chelsea. And I think for both Palmer and Nkunku, you really have great talents here, great individual talents who can make things happen. And it's on Maresca's system to not stifle that, to elevate that, to make that freer, to make that a real problem for opposition. Because with both of these talents, especially if you have a more focal point, kind of attracting attention, taking a lot of the burden away from them, and you can give them the space in and around the box, they can cause huge issues for opponents. So I'm really excited to see what they could do this season at Stamford Bridge, because, you know, Mudryk for me has had a really bad pre-season. I mean, he still looks like an absolutely wayward player. Madueke for me blows hot and cold. I think he's more positive than negative. But, you know, when we're talking seriously about the attackers I want to see and ones that I kind of have more assurance are going to give me a good performance, I'm thinking about Nkunku. I'm obviously thinking about Cole Palmer. So the big other thing is obviously Pedro Neto, who is a natural wide player who very much suits what Maresca wants to do. I feel like he won't start this game. I'd be quite shocked if he does start. He's barely been in training a couple of days. And I think a great player to bring off the bench. Premier League experience, the sort of signing that Chelsea aren't really making at the moment. And someone who has scored against Man City. And I think if the game becomes a situation where City are dominating more of the ball, there is obviously room for him to hit on transition. And we delved into this on the channel recently, where we looked at his decision making when he is in transition, when he is out wide, when he's taking on his fullback. He can make really good choices. So I'm obviously excited to see him get a few minutes for Chelsea. So that is my starting 11. I said on a City podcast that I did earlier this week, I think it's going to be a score draw. I think that's quite positive given what I've said over the course of pre-season. I just think early season, maybe Chelsea talent-wise can have individual moments to make a difference, but I still have massive concerns about our balance. I have massive concerns about our goalkeeper. I have massive concerns about this style of play, which a team like City, our man-for-man marking not being that good at the moment, and also our ability to play out from the back. It's things like that worry me. You know, I think if fans see Chelsea go toe-to-toe and play their game to the best of their ability, and although, of course, it's not going to be perfect day one, but, you know, understand you're going up against the champions, understand you're playing against Erling Haaland, you're playing against Bernardo Silva, you're playing against some wonderful talents, and you have to accept that. I think what fans won't accept is us doing really dumb things with the ball and giving the ball away cheaply, because no one can dress that up as really intellectual and smart football. It just looks dumb, it just looks self-defeating. So that's my hope tomorrow. Even if Chelsea don't, you know, win, which is, you know, unlikely, they are Man City, we want to see a performance of intelligence. We want to see a performance where there is a sense that there is something for Chelsea fans to cling on to and stick with and persist with this season, because obviously the optimism is not where it probably should be at this time of the season. But we've talked about who's responsible for creating that mood. It's not me, it's not you. I think it's people who bear a lot of responsibility, but obviously that can massively change by Maresca and the players, especially tomorrow. So those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.